Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, February 2nd, 2022. President Joe Biden formally approves deploying 3,000 U.S. troops to Poland, Germany, and Romania to signal to Russian President Vladimir Putin that the U.S. will support its NATO allies in Eastern Europe. This as Russia's military is still massed on the borders of Ukraine. Coming up, we'll hear from the Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby and talk with the Wall Street Journal national security reporter Gordon Lubold. U.S. senators on two committees getting a closed-door briefing on the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan last year. The briefing from the Defense Secretary and the Secretary of State. Republicans pushing to have that open to the public. U.S. House starting work on a science and technology research bill. The Democratic sponsors say it will better position the U.S. to compete with China. Republican opponents saying it spends too much on unrelated items. White House COVID response team giving an update on the plan to distribute Pfizer's vaccine to children under 5 years old if and when the FDA approves the emergency use authorization. And President Biden relaunches his signature initiative, Cancer Moonshot. The president says it's aimed at ending cancer as we know it. From the New York Times, President Biden has approved the deployment of about 3,000 additional American troops to Eastern Europe. Administration officials said the troops include 1,000 already in Germany. They'll head to Poland and Romania. The Pentagon spokesman John F. Kirby said their purpose will be to reassure NATO allies that while the United States has no intention of sending troops into Ukraine, where President Vladimir Putin of Russia has been threatening an invasion, Mr. Biden would protect America's NATO allies from any Russian aggression. That was from the New York Times. Now to the Pentagon briefing room and John Kirby speaking Wednesday morning to the press.
The current situation demands that we reinforce the deterrent and defensive posture on NATO's eastern flank. President Biden has been clear that the United States will respond to the growing threat to Europe's security and stability. Our commitment to NATO, Article 5, and collective defense remains ironclad. As part of this commitment, and to be prepared for a range of contingencies, the United States will soon move additional forces to Romania, Poland, and Germany. I want to be very clear about something. These are not permanent moves. They are moves designed to respond to the current security environment. Moreover, these forces are not going to fight in Ukraine. They are going to ensure the robust defense of our NATO allies. Now, let me lay this out for you in a series of 3 steps. First, 1,000 soldiers that are currently based in Germany will reposition to Romania in the coming days. Now, this is a Stryker squadron, a mounted cavalry unit that's designed to deploy in short order and to move quickly once in place. And they will augment the some 900 U.S. forces that are currently in Romania. Now, this force is designed to deter aggression and enhance our defensive capabilities in frontline allied states. And we expect them, as I said, to move in coming days. Secretary Austin discussed this repositioning to Romania just last week in his conversation with the Romanian Minister of Defense. And again, I want to stress that this move is coming at the express invitation of the Romanian government. Additionally, we welcome French President Macron's announcement that France intends to deploy forces to Romania under NATO command, which Secretary Austin discussed with the French Defense Minister, Florence Parly, just last week. The United States will continue to consult and coordinate with France and all our allies to ensure that we complement each other in our respective deployments. And of course, we're going to continue to work through NATO to make appropriate defensive and non-escalatory force posture alignments. Second, we are moving an additional force of about approximately 2,000 troops from the United States to Europe in the next few days. The 82nd Airborne Division is deploying components of an infantry brigade combat team and key enablers to Poland, and the 18th Airborne Corps is moving a joint task force capable headquarters to Germany. Now, both of them, as you know, are based in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Collectively, this force is trained and equipped for a variety of missions to deter aggression and to reassure and to defend our allies. Not surprisingly, we work very closely with our Polish and German allies to set the stage for these movements, and we absolutely appreciate their support. Again, these are not permanent moves. They respond to current conditions. We will adjust our posture as those conditions evolve. Third, and finally, all of these forces are separate and in addition to the 8,500 personnel in the United States on heightened alert posture that I announced last week. Those 8,500 are not currently being deployed, but remain ready to move if called for the NATO response force or as needed for other contingencies as directed by the Secretary or by President Biden.
Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby in the Pentagon briefing room. He said additional deployments of U.S. troops to Eastern Europe could be announced in the near future. There's this from the Washington Post. While President Biden has ruled out any combat deployment to Ukraine, it remains possible that U.S. troops could be directed to assist in the evacuation of American citizens and diplomats from that country, should such measures become necessary. About 200 members of the Florida National Guard remain in Ukraine, where they are providing training to local forces and could be withdrawn quickly if necessary. And that was also John Kirby saying that. Some reaction to the deployment on Capitol Hill from Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. He sits on the Foreign Relations Committee.
Concerning a different crisis, right now the Biden administration is deploying 3,000 troops to Eastern Europe. What are your views on that? And what are you hoping to hear from officials tomorrow in their classified briefings?
Well, from my standpoint, I agree with Ronald Reagan, you achieve peace through strength. And when we talk about strength, we're talking first economic strength and then military strength to deter your enemies. Unfortunately, starting with the crisis at the border, the first day in office, the actions, the policies of this administration have weakened America economically, internationally. The embarrassing and dangerous surrender in Afghanistan, we just came from a briefing there. It's noticed by our enemies. So our enemies perceive the weakness and they take the opportunity to act. I don't think you would see Putin surround Ukraine were it not for the weakness of this administration. I don't think you'd see China with overflights over Taiwan, or Iran more active in Yemen, or North Korea testing these weapons. So we are highly concerned about what's happening in Ukraine, but you need to deal with that through strength, through actions from, like we did in the previous administration. You didn't see Putin move during the previous administration where we were strengthening our military, where we were strengthening our nation. They're only moving in reaction to weakness.
Senator Ron Johnson, Republican from Wisconsin, with reporters on Capitol Hill. Joining us now is Gordon Lubold, national security reporter with the Wall Street Journal. Why is the Biden administration sending these thousands more U.S. troops to Eastern Europe?
The White House, there was a meeting at the White House yesterday in which President Biden decided with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff General Milley to go ahead and deploy these troops to Eastern Europe. They are going to NATO countries, which fall under the collective, Article 5 collective defense of NATO. But really to send a signal to Russian President Vladimir Putin that the U.S. is, standing, by its allies. Not that Putin is interested in invading any of those countries. Ukraine, which is not a member of NATO and does not fall under the collective defense Article 5, is right there, though. And I think the idea is to kind of send a signal and reassure allies in the region.
So they think that this signal sending will actually work because, I don't know, all indications are that, as you said, Putin doesn't seem to be responding to any threats from the West of sanctions or anything else.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wouldn't say that they are confident that it will work either way. I always has throughout this whole thing so far, there's been a big question mark about what Mr. Putin will do or not do. He certainly sent no signals that he's backing down. He did say the other day he's open to more dialogue, but I don't think it's clear that anybody's taking him at his word necessarily. I think people in the sphere, military officials and others, think that the opportunity would be ripe sometime in the next several weeks the ground freezes, for example, in the region in another 2 or 3 weeks, although the Winter Olympics are another factor, and the timing of those Olympics in China are another factor. And I don't think anybody thinks that Putin would upstage President Xi on that. So it's a little unclear, and nobody knows exactly if Putin's really decided to invade Ukraine or not. But the idea is like I say, to send a signal to allies that the U.S. stands beside them.
What's the status of the talks and the negotiations that have been going on between the U.S., Russia, and NATO?
Well, I mean, the talks have gone back and forth. Different U.S. officials have been high-level talks. Other NATO countries are engaging with Russia and with Mr. Putin personally. But I don't think anybody thinks that the talks thus far have moved the needle in any significant way to give anybody confidence that that Mr. Putin's thinking has changed. Again, nobody really knows what Mr. Putin's thinking is changing, but the administration would say his actions are louder than any words, and his actions suggest the amassing of more than 100,000 troops along the Ukraine border send a signal of his intentions. I think it's unclear. I mean, anything could happen. I think what the fear is that if he does conduct some kind of incursion, a small one would actually make it harder to keep NATO together, because I think there's clear disagreements within the alliance about what the response should be. A much more massive, scary invasion of a lot of tens of thousands of forces and potential death of innocents inside Ukraine, along with the 20 or 30,000 Americans who are also still there, would signal a much more, and other countries obviously, would signal probably a much more galvanizing event that would bring the alliance closer together than where it is right now.
We're talking with Gordon Lubold from the Wall Street Journal. From the sources that you've spoken with, how much concern is there at the White House, at the Pentagon, that this is a very serious situation that could turn bad very quickly? Are they really worried? You used the word fear and scary in your last answer. Where are we on that?
Yeah, so it's hard to say. They're definitely taking it seriously. Like, there's no question that because of the question mark that about what Mr. Putin's intentions might be, I think they would say that they have no choice but to take it very seriously, and certainly the deployment of these forces and potentially more from the U.S. and from American troops already in the region is a signal of them taking it seriously. There are people who definitely think it could get very ugly. A full-scale invasion, as I said before, really could put Americans in the crossfire. Americans get killed inside Ukraine, not intentionally, but because of the scale of an invasion, would put the Biden administration in a pretty tricky spot. None of these troops are supposed to go into Ukraine. U.S. has 200 or 300 advisors there, but they would probably be removed, likely most of them, if there was a large invasion. But American civilians and Ukrainian civilians who could be hurt, it could be a pretty ugly situation. And I think that there are people who are planning this or planning for a response definitely have that in their head. There's certainly other thinking that what Mr. Putin would do was not to do a large-scale invasion and do something much smaller that would give him an off-ramp from this kind of tense situation, but also potentially kind of contribute to the splintering of NATO on this issue.
Gordon Lubold is a national security reporter with the Wall Street Journal. Find his stories at WSJ.com and on Twitter @GLubold. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Senator Josh Hawley, Republican of Missouri, says the Biden administration should no longer support possible Ukrainian membership in NATO. Hawley sent a letter to Secretary of State Antony Blinken and copied to Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. This was first reported in Axios, writing that it's not clear that Ukraine's accession would serve U.S. interests, given that the world has changed a lot since 2008. Well, that was when a summit proposed that Ukraine could possibly come into NATO. Senator Hawley mentioning that in particular the rise of China. At the White House today, Press Secretary Jen Psaki asked by a reporter for a response.
Senator Hawley was out in a statement today saying that the president should sort of take NATO membership off the table for Ukraine, and that wasn't in U.S. interest to do that. Do you think that sort of rhetoric or sort of position by a U.S. senator right now is helpful in this showdown between the West and Russia?
Well, if you are just digesting Russian misinformation and parroting Russian talking points, you are not aligned with long-standing bipartisan American values, which is to stand up for the sovereignty of countries like Ukraine but others, their right to choose their own alliances, and also to stand against, very clearly, the efforts or attempts or potential attempts by any country to invade and take territory of another country. That applies to Senator Hawley, but it also applies to others who may be parroting the talking points of Russian propagandist leaders.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. Well, Senator Josh Hawley commenting today about a different issue, foreign affairs, the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. He spoke with reporters on Capitol Hill outside of the room where the senators from two committees were getting a closed-door briefing from the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and the Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Senator Hawley asked about a story in Axios from Tuesday that reads, leaked notes from a White House Situation Room meeting the day before Kabul fell shed new light on just how unprepared the Biden administration was to evacuate Afghan nationals who'd helped the United States in its 20-year war against the Taliban. Hours before the Taliban seized control of Afghanistan's capital on August 15, 2021, senior Biden administration officials were still discussing and assigning basic actions involved in a mass civilian evacuation. That was from the Axios article. Here's the question to Senator Hawley.
Did you see this memo about the
I did.
ill-prepared?
I did.
Let me just John up on you here.
Yeah.
There we are.
I did see the memo.
Mr. Senator, tell us about your reaction.
Well, I mean, the first thing is that we, as ever with this administration, we learn more from reading leaks in the press than we ever do from listening to these guys. And by the way, the fact that this hearing is happening behind closed doors is absolutely outrageous. It is a total travesty, and it's for one reason only. They do not want to have any accountability. They do not want to answer questions in public. Do you know General Milley and company still have not responded to my questions for the record following our last hearing in September? In September, they still have not replied. Why? Because those answers might become public. They don't want to answer any questions in public. This is a joke. This is not oversight. It is a joke. And now as this administration blunders into war with Ukraine, guess what they're going to do tomorrow? Brief us on Ukraine. How? Behind closed doors, because they don't want you asking any questions. They don't want the American people seeing their answers. They don't want to be accountable for anything. This is the most disastrous administration for American foreign policy since the Vietnam War, and it only gets worse. So let me just reiterate, this is a joke. What's happening today is a clown show. It is meant to be a clown show, and it is an absolute travesty. I hope you all are livid. I'm livid. You should be livid, because this is an attempt to shut you out and to shut out the American people so nobody gets any answers.
What questions were you asked today on our behalf?
Well, number one, why have not the people who are appearing today resigned? Not a one of them has resigned. Why not? Number two, why the day before Kabul fell, was the State Department and the Defense Department only just then starting to plan for the evacuation of civilians? I mean, really, how incompetent can you possibly be? Did the State Department and the Defense Department actually coordinate on the evacuation of civilians? The Defense Department claims they told State to do the civilian evacuation earlier. That's what General Milley testified to and General Austin back in September. Is that true? I'd like to know. I'm going to ask Secretary Blinken. So we'll see if we get any answers. My prediction is we'll get no answers. It'll be all kinds of prevarications and evasions, and it'll all be behind closed doors, which is why this is a joke.
Senator Josh Hawley with reporters before going into that closed-door briefing on the Afghanistan withdrawal. Back to the White House briefing on Afghanistan, Press Secretary Jen Psaki asked about a report that people in that country who want to leave now are facing obstacles.
There's a new report out from the UN that says that more than 100 former members of the Afghan government and other Afghan allies of the U.S. have been killed since the Taliban returned to power. There are additional reports that thousands of Afghan allies of the U.S. are still in Afghanistan. They're hiding out. They can't get to the U.S. because of issues with a special immigrant visa. Does the administration consider it a priority to get these people out of Afghanistan? And if so, why are they still there 6 months after we withdrew?
We absolutely do, and we have also helped thousands of our Afghan partners leave Afghanistan since our full withdrawal at the end of August. As has been reported, there was a delay or there was a gap where there were not flights. Those have resumed, which is a good sign, which will hopefully enable us to continue to get more people out. Obviously, the president also met with the Qatari leader earlier this week. They have been an important partner here, as we don't have the diplomatic presence, as you well know, that we had prior. I would just note that from the beginning, we've been able to evacuate more than 120,000 people from Afghanistan. Some American citizens, many of them Afghan partners and allies, people who have fought alongside us during the 20-year war. And that is the largest evacuation since the Vietnam War. So I would say we are still committed to doing this. We are not naive about the challenges, nor are we naive about the conditions on the ground, which is why we are so focused on getting humanitarian assistance to the people in Afghanistan through trusted and reliable sources. But it is a good sign that the flights have resumed. Obviously, this was a topic of discussion with the Qataris earlier this week as well.
The White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, and Reuters reports the U.S. Treasury Department offering guidance today on sanctions exemptions issued last fall for humanitarian work in Afghanistan, saying that international banks can transfer money to Afghanistan for humanitarian purposes, and aid groups are allowed to pay teachers and healthcare workers at state-run institutions without fear of breaching sanctions on the Taliban. The United Nations says more than half the country's 39 million people suffer extreme hunger, and the economy, education, and social services are facing collapse. U.S. House of Representatives today beginning debate on a bill designed to improve U.S. economic competition with China, including increasing semiconductor production and reforming some trade laws. It's named the America Competes Act, and COMPETES stands for Creating Opportunities for Manufacturing, Preeminence in Technology, and Economic Strength. But some House Republicans say the bill was written by the Democratic majority without their input and would, in fact, help China. Here's some of the House floor debate. We begin with Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson, Democrat from Texas. She chairs the Science, Space, and Technology Committee.
The United States has long been a beacon of excellence in science and innovation. However, we cannot rest on our laurels. It is time for us to revitalize federal support for the kinds of research and development initiatives that enable us to achieve the excellence of first place. And we need to take a holistic approach that encompasses everything from the state-of-the-art research and development taking place at our national labs to advanced manufacturing facilities that employ and support communities across this nation. It is not an understatement to say that we can usher in an exciting, prosperous future for American competitiveness with the suite of provisions contained in Divisions A and B of the America Competes Act. These include transformative support for the National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy's Office of Science, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology. In addition, the provisions in this act will enable us to create a strong and diverse STEM workforce, one that is ready to address the great societal and scientific challenges we face as a nation. One of many STEM provisions included in COMPETES is the STEM Opportunities Act. This is an initiative I've been working on for 15 years and which is now needed more than ever. With this legislation, we are making investments to build clean energy solutions, address the climate crisis, reinforce our national security, enhance our semiconductor manufacturing capabilities, and so much more. In short, we're acting to address the critical needs identified by the scientific community industry, academia, and other stakeholders as they most need to succeed in the 21st century.
Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson, Democrat from Texas, she chairs the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, part of the House floor debate today. Speaking in opposition, a Republican member of the committee, Michael Waltz of Florida.
It is inaccurate to say this is a China bill or a competitiveness bill. I want to be crystal clear. This is not bipartisan legislation, and it is not focused on the problems at hand. If the Speaker and our colleagues in the House Democrats were serious about addressing the threat from the Chinese Communist Party, they would have moved our science bill, those dozen bills, into conference months ago. We have been ready to go since June, and everyone who's worked on it on both sides of the aisle knows it. That's when the two core elements of our package passed the House with overwhelming bipartisan support. But instead, this body wasted all summer and fall on massive spending bills like Build Back Better, and now we have little to show for it. And so here we are on Groundhog Day, fittingly, sadly, going through the same exercise we have already done multiple times. And let's be candid. Democrats are trying to cram through a massive bill filled with unnecessary spending that dramatically alters what has passed through this House, instead of focusing on the issues at hand. And what started as a bipartisan effort to keep the U.S. globally competitive, somehow in the last few weeks went through the black box of Speaker Pelosi's office and emerged as the Build Back Better backup plan, filled with failed initiatives and progressive demands. And instead of addressing competition and the threat from the communist leadership in China, this bill now corrupts good, solid, bipartisan work that I was personally very proud of, and it corrupts it with thousands of pages of irrelevant policies. So what kind of China bill mentions coral reefs more than China?
Congressman Michael Waltz, Republican from Florida, on the House floor. The House Rules Committee allowed a few hundred amendments to be offered to this bill, although many could be packaged into an en bloc amendment, so it may not be that they debate all those hundreds. But still, it could take a couple of days to get through the debate to a final vote on the House floor. It's expected to extend into next week. You can follow the debate live on C-SPAN television or listen on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. On Wall Street, the Dow up 224, NASDAQ up 71, S&P up 42. Washington Today continues in a minute.
The weekly podcast is a unique offering from C-SPAN. We tape it right here in the C-SPAN studios in beautiful downtown Capitol Hill. In the town where extremes get all the attention, this isn't more extreme opinion, it's extreme history. From what's new and happening right now, relive the history you know. So listen, follow, and enjoy the C-SPAN podcast, The Weekly. Find it wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which is available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. A White House COVID-19 response team update today on the plans to distribute a vaccine for children under 5 years old once it is approved. Pfizer and BioNTech have asked the Food and Drug Administration, at the request of FDA, we are told, for emergency use of the vaccine at 1/10 the dose for kids ages 6 months to 4 years old. Jeff Zients is the White House COVID-19 response coordinator.
Importantly, this vaccine is specifically formulated for kids under the age of 5. So we're working closely with states, local health departments, pediatricians, families, doctors, and pharmacies to ensure the vaccine is available at thousands of locations nationwide. We've already secured ample doses and the necessary needles and supplies specially made for kids in this age group. Following FDA authorization, we would immediately begin packing and shipping doses to states and healthcare providers. And in short order, following CDC recommendations, parents will be able to get their kids under 5 vaccinated at convenient locations, locations they know and trust. While we know many parents are eager to get their kids the protection of the vaccine, we know others have questions. So we're working with our partners to ensure all parents have access to the facts and information they need to make the right decision. And as always, we're laser focused on equity and making sure we reach the hardest hit and most at-risk communities and families. A year ago, we stood up a historic nationwide vaccination program that's now gotten 75% adults in the US fully vaccinated. We then launched a boosters program that's gotten almost 90 million Americans their booster shot. And we established a vaccination program specifically for kids ages 5 to 11 that has protected millions of kids around the country. Now, with a potential vaccine for kids under 5 on the horizon, our message to parents and families is simple. We're doing everything we can to prepare now. We're taking all of the best practices and applying all the lessons learned over the last 12 months to ensure getting kids under 5 the protection of vaccine is easy and convenient. And we'll be ready to start getting shots in arms soon after FDA and CDC make their decisions.
Jeff Zients is White House COVID-19 response coordinator, part of today's virtual briefing. Under 5 years old is the only age group that does not yet have access to a coronavirus vaccine approved for use by the government, and the FDA has scheduled a virtual meeting for February 15th to consider the Pfizer vaccine application. Some other COVID news today. The U.S. Army says it will immediately begin discharging soldiers who refuse to be vaccinated, joining the Navy and Air Force, which began doing so in December. And even though infections from the Omicron variant are falling across the United States, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention predicting that the U.S. could have up to 75,000 more COVID deaths by the end of this month, because deaths usually lag behind the spike of infections by a couple of weeks. That would bring the U.S. death toll to over 950,000. From the Washington Post, President Biden, renewing his pledge to end cancer as we know it, plans to announce a multi-pronged effort to bolster prevention, screening, and research with the goal of reducing the death from the disease by 50% during the next 25 years. The initiative, which Biden scheduled to outline to 100 cancer researchers, advocates, and patients gathered at the White House, represents the relaunch of the cancer moonshot that he headed as vice president in the last year of the Obama administration. Biden and wife Jill embraced the cause with fervor after the death of their 46-year-old son, Beau, from brain cancer in 2015. That from the Washington Post. The event happening today in the White House East Room. Here's President Biden.
Cancer moonshot brought the country and the world closer together on this issue. And when we left office, Jill and I knew we had to keep it going. So we took a lot of you. We had 5 Nobel laureates and others who were involved. Through the Biden Cancer Initiative, we focused on turning the moonshot into a movement to create the cancer research and care system that most people think we already have and that they all deserve. But they don't know we don't have it till they try to deal with it. And everywhere we'd go, people would share their stories in grocery stores, airports, rope lines. While we heard stories of loss and despair, the stories began to change just a little bit, a change of feeling, real hope. But not because of me and Jill, but because of all of you in this room and so many more at home. Doctors, researchers, advocates, caregivers, patients, survivors. And that's why today I'm proud to announce our plan to supercharge the cancer moonshot as a central effort of the Biden-Harris administration. It's bold, it's ambitious, but it's completely doable. Just as we harness the science to develop cutting-edge COVID-19 vaccines and treatments, we'll bring a fierce sense of urgency to the fight against cancer. The goal is to cut the cancer death rate in half in the next 25 years, at least by 50%. And to turn more cancers from death sentences into chronic diseases that people can live with. To create a more supportive experience for patients and their families. And by doing these things and more, to end cancer as we know it.
President Biden at the White House. He was joined by First Lady Jill Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, and both Democratic and Republican members of Congress. President also mentioning that he had a colonoscopy in November, during which he had a polyp removed that was benign. He said, "I know cancer is scary. Going to the doctor can be scary, but screening is how you catch it before it's too late." This is Washington Today. In Great Britain, the leader of the Scottish National Party, Ian Blackford, was ejected from the House of Commons by the Speaker there earlier in the week after claiming that Prime Minister Boris Johnson willfully misled Parliament about his attendance at parties at the Prime Minister's residence, in apparent violation of strict COVID-19 lockdown rules in the country. Today, at the start of Prime Minister's Question Time, Speaker Lindsay Hoyle again stated why it's important that members do not accuse each other of lying unless through proper motions. Ian Blackford was later recognized to ask the Prime Minister a question.
Mr. Speaker, just in relation to your earlier statement, I have a difficulty reconciling the Prime Minister's version of events with other evidence, and as you know, I have a duty to reflect and represent the deep, deep public anger with the Prime Minister. That said, Mr. Speaker, I respect the absolute impartiality that you take in your role, and I want to set on the record that I respect both you and the authority of the Chair. Mr. Speaker, this morning the Telegraph newspaper revealed that the Prime Minister attended a party in his flat on the 13th of November 2020. The Prime Minister previously told the House that no party took place. The police are now investigating this party, and we face a very real prospect of a sitting Prime Minister being questioned under caution and being fined in office. And if he is questioned, Mr. Speaker, he must go. If he's fined, he must resign. Mr. Speaker, you'll agree that the House should not be treated with contempt. So can the Prime Minister... here we go again. So can the Prime Minister update the House on his whereabouts on the evening of the 13th of November? Surely, Mr. Speaker, he doesn't need to wait for an investigation to tell us exactly where he was.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, here we go again, says the right honourable gentleman opposite, and I must say those are entirely my feelings. He asked exactly the same questions as I recall in the chamber a few days ago. He knows, Mr. Speaker, that the process must go on, but I can tell him what's been going on in Downing Street, Mr. Speaker. In November and throughout, we've been delivering the fastest vaccine and booster rollout anywhere in Europe. We've been getting people back into work, Mr. Speaker. We've been getting people back into work, Mr. Speaker, and we've been helping to bring the West together to defy what I think is completely unacceptable threats and intimidation from the Putin regime against Ukraine. And that's what we've been doing.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, he is leader of the Conservative Party, questioned by the Scottish National Party parliamentary leader Ian Blackford. That's not the main opposition. The main opposition is Labour. It was during Prime Minister's Question Time in the House of Commons in London today. Back here in the U.S., entertainment newspaper Variety reports the United States is the only major country in the world where terrestrial radio pays no royalties to performers or recorded music copyright owners of the songs they play, while the more than 8,300 AM and FM stations across the country pay royalties to songwriters. They have never paid performers or copyright holders, although streaming services do. There was a U.S. House Judiciary Committee hearing today on a bill that is designed to change that. It's called the American Music Fairness Act, introduced by both a Republican and a Democrat. One of the witnesses, award-winning artist Gloria Estefan.
Each of the songs that are precious and meaningful to you was a labor of love for the songwriters, the artists, the musicians, and producers that brought it to life. They poured their own hearts and souls into its creation. But when their music is played on the radio, artists don't get paid. Only the songwriters do. The radio stations benefit from the advertising dollars, but the artists that breathe life into a song, the featured artists, the singers, producers, and studio musicians are left out. This could be particularly problematic for older artists whose songs are not in the top 40, but still get airplay. I would venture to guess that many of the songs that mean the most to you are ones from these music legends. And I, in fact, raised my children listening to the local oldies station as I drove them to and from school. At that time, the 50s, 60s, and 70s were considered oldies. Those things have changed now. My son and daughter loved not only hearing the beautiful and catchy songs, but we're also able to learn a deep appreciation for the varied styles of music that American artists have been creating through the years. While I'm the one testifying before you today, I represent hundreds of thousands of Americans who endeavor to make a living making music. Each of us has passion, talent, and drive. I was blessed to be able to make a full living doing what I love. And you know these artists. They're your family, your friends, and neighbors. They sacrifice so much to pursue their passion for music, often having to take on multiple jobs to pay the bills. The American Music Fairness Act is for them.
Gloria Stefan, musical artist, testifying today before the House Judiciary Committee. Another witness, Curtis Leggett, President and CEO of the National Association of Broadcasters. He opposed this bill.
Mr. Chairman, at a moment when local stations are doing their best work, when in the face of a global pandemic, we are connecting communities rather than dividing them, informing them rather than misleading them, and providing our critical service free to all listeners when many Americans are struggling financially, the American Music Fairness Act would impose a new royalty on local radio that is financially untenable for broadcasters of all sizes and unjustified as a matter of policy. Broadcasters thank Representatives Kathy Castor, Steve Womack, and the 234 House and Senate co-sponsors of the Local Radio Freedom Act, which recognizes our unique value and opposes any new performance fee on broadcast radio.
Curtis Leggett is President and CEO, National Association of Broadcasters. The bill that was before the House Judiciary Committee today, the subject of the hearing, American Music Fairness Act, would set royalties for songs based on radio station size. Those with more than $1.5 million in revenue would have the rate set by the Copyright Royalty Board, and the smallest stations would pay a flat fee as low as $10 a year. U.S. Senate leaders today sending get well soon wishes to Senator Ben Ray Lujan, Democrat from New Mexico, after the senator had surgery for a stroke that he suffered last week. Reports are he's expected to make a full recovery. First, here is the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer.
Yesterday, we all received the awful and frightening news that one of our dear friends, Senator Ben Ray Lujan of New Mexico, suffered a stroke last Thursday after experiencing dizziness and fatigue while back in his home state. Our thoughts, our prayers, our most fervent well wishes go out to Ben Ray and his family. I was glad and relieved to hear that he is expected to make a full recovery, and all of us are rooting for him every step of the way between now and the day he makes his return to the Senate. Senator Lujan has served in this chamber for only a year, but already he has become one of the most beloved members of this body. Public service literally runs in the family, and you'll be hard-pressed to find someone who fights for their home state like Ben Ray does for New Mexico. As Senator Lujan begins his path to full recovery, I want to offer encouragement and praise for his superb staff, who will continue their work, providing vital constituent services for the people of New Mexico. In the days to come, we will continue working and communicating with Senator Lujan's staff about his recovery process, and all of us are hopeful and optimistic that he will be back to his old self before long. In the meantime, the U.S. Senate will continue to move forward in carrying out its business on behalf of the American people.
Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, the Majority Leader. Also speaking on the Senate floor, the Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky.
First, the entire Senate is praying for and pulling for our colleague, Senator Lujan. We learned yesterday that our colleague suffered a stroke late last week and has been hospitalized in New Mexico as he recovers. Certainly encouraging to read that our friend and colleague is expected to make a full recovery. I know that all 99 of his colleagues are thinking of him every day, rooting for a swift and smooth recovery, and already looking forward to the next time we see him.
Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell. NBC News reports that aides to Senator Lujan saying the senator could be away from Washington for 4 to 6 weeks. And that, reports Vox Media, throws Democrats' agenda in the evenly divided Senate into question. The Vox article continues, unlike the House, which adopted proxy voting policies during the pandemic, senators must be present in person to vote. So prolonged illness that renders a senator's presence impossible can be a serious complication for a majority. Thanks for listening today to Washington Today. You can get top Washington stories sent to your inbox each day by subscribing to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word. Just go to c-span.org/connect to subscribe. Have a good night.